The cabin was silent except for the hum of twin turboprops cutting through thin air at 23,000 feet. First Officer Kira Vance kept her eyes on the horizon, fingers light on the yoke, while Captain Marcus Holloway reviewed the fuel calculations for the third time that hour. It was supposed to be a routine cargo run, medical supplies and communication equipment from Incirlik Air Base to a forward operating base in the Hindu Kush. The kind of mission flown 100 times without incident, the kind that made veterans complacent and rookies nervous. Kira was neither. She'd flown combat sorties in worse weather, over hotter zones, but today she wore the quiet mask of someone who'd learned that proving yourself never actually ended. It just changed uniforms. Holloway hadn't spoken to her in 40 minutes. Not unusual. He was old guard, a lifer who'd come up through the ranks when women in cockpits were novelties, not necessities. She could feel his disapproval in the way he double-checked her pre-flight, the way he called her Vance instead of by her call sign. To him, she was a checkbox, a quota, a girl playing dress-up in a man's war. Then the left engine coughed. It was subtle, a hiccup in the rhythm, a momentary drop in RPM that most passengers wouldn't notice. But Kira's hand was already moving toward the throttle before Holloway's head snapped up. "You feel that?" he asked, voice tight. "Engine 1," she said, eyes scanning the gauges. Oil pressure dropping, temperature climbing. The instruments were telling a story she'd read before, and it never ended well. "Compensating," Holloway muttered, adjusting the mixture. The engine smoothed out, but Kira watched the needles. Numbers didn't lie. Whatever was happening inside that turbine, it wasn't over. 3 minutes later, it happened again. Harder this time. The aircraft shuddered and the mountains below seemed to rise up like teeth. Holloway's jaw clenched. "Base, this is Talon 47. We're experiencing intermittent power loss on Engine 1, requesting priority clearance to—" The engine exploded. Not a Hollywood fireball, but a mechanical death rattle, metal tearing, oil spraying across the cowling, the propeller seizing mid-revolution. The aircraft yawed hard left, and Kira's instincts took over before her mind could catch up. Right rudder, opposite aileron, feather the prop. Her hands moved like they were choreographed, muscle memory carved into her bones by 1,000 hours in the seat and twice as many on the ground, studying, drilling, preparing for the moment everyone said would never come. Holloway was on the radio, voice steady but strained. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Talon 47, single engine failure, coordinates." He stopped, looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since they'd lifted off. "Vance, can you hold her?" Kira's eyes never left the instruments. "I've got her." The aircraft was a C-27J Spartan, a tactical airlifter designed for short runways and rough terrain, but losing an engine at altitude over the Hindu Kush wasn't in any manual as a survivable scenario. The mountain peaks stretched for miles in every direction, jagged ridges of rock and ice that looked like the spine of some ancient beast. There was no flat ground, no margin for error. And the nearest airfield was 40 nautical miles northeast, across a range that topped out at 18,000 feet, with one engine. Holloway was already running the emergency checklist, but Kira could see the math in his eyes. They were heavy, fully loaded, and the remaining engine was screaming at maximum continuous power just to maintain altitude. They weren't going to make it over the mountains. Not like this. "We need to drop weight," she said. Holloway hesitated. The cargo, $50,000 worth of medical supplies destined for a field hospital that was already running on fumes. Insulin, antibiotics, surgical kits, the kind of supplies that saved lives, plural, not just one or two but dozens. Dropping it meant people died. Keeping it meant they all died. "Do it," Holloway said quietly. Kira keyed the intercom. "Loadmaster, jettison cargo, authorization Holloway." There was a pause. Then the voice of Staff Sergeant Reyes came back tight and clipped. "Copy, jettison in progress." The rear ramp cracked open, and the roar of wind filled the cabin. Kira felt the aircraft shudder as the pallet slid backward, tumbling out into the void. 2 tons of supplies vanishing into the mountains below. She tried not to think about the faces she'd never see, the hands that would reach for medicine that wasn't there. The aircraft lifted slightly, not much, but enough. Airspeed increasing, Holloway said. We might have a shot. Kira's hands were locked on the controls, every muscle in her body coiled tight. The mountain ridge was coming up fast, a wall of granite that seemed to fill the windscreen. The altimeter ticked upward with agonizing slowness. 12,000 feet, 13, 14. The peak was at 17.5. They weren't going to make it. Holloway saw it too. Base, Talon 47, we are not going to clear the ridge. Recommend search and rescue scramble to. There's a valley, Kira said. Holloway's head snapped toward her. What? 2 o'clock, 12 miles. I flew over it last month on a reconnaissance run. It's narrow, but it's there. We can thread it. You want to fly a crippled aircraft through an unmapped mountain valley. I want to not die. Holloway stared at her, then at the mountain, then back at her. You're sure? No. He almost smiled. All right, Vance, your airplane. Kira banked right, the single engine howling in protest. The valley appeared like a scar in the mountainside, a narrow corridor of shadow and stone that wound between the peaks. It was maybe a quarter-mile wide at the mouth, tapering to nothing in the distance. Flying through, it would be like threading a needle while riding a motorcycle. At night, blindfolded. She'd done worse. The walls closed in around them, rock faces streaking past close enough to see the striations in the stone. Holloway had stopped talking, stopped breathing maybe. Kira's world had narrowed to 3 things: airspeed, altitude, and the ribbon of sky ahead. The valley twisted left, then right, and she moved the yoke with micro-adjustments, each one a conversation between her hands and the aircraft. Trust me. I've got you. We're going to make it. The valley opened up ahead, and beyond it the far side of the range, clear sky, flat ground, life. They punched through into sunlight, and Holloway exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. Jesus Christ, Vance. Kira's hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up. Still with me, Captain? Yeah, his voice was different, softer. Yeah, I'm with you. The emergency landing was textbook. Kira brought the Spartan down on a stretch of desert hardpan 20 miles from the nearest outpost, the single landing gear kissing the ground so gently it barely raised dust. Holloway worked the radio while Reyes secured the cabin, but Kira just sat there, hands still on the yoke, staring at the empty sky. Vance. She looked over. Holloway's face was pale, but his eyes were clear. Where'd you learn to fly like that? Kira shrugged. Everywhere. It wasn't a lie. She'd learned to fly in her uncle's Cessna over the Kansas plains when she was 15, traded lessons for labor on his ranch. She'd learned combat maneuvers at Pensacola, where instructors told her she was too small, too quiet, too soft. She'd learned patience in Afghanistan, flying medevac runs under fire while ground troops screamed over the radio. And she'd learned survival in the dark hours after her squadron lost 3 birds in a month, and the brass started asking if maybe women weren't cut out for this after all. She'd learned by never giving them a reason to be right. Holloway nodded slowly. You've got a call sign. Ghost Rider. Why? Because I come back. They sat in silence while rescue birds appeared on the horizon, rotors cutting the air like a promise. Holloway keyed the radio, gave their position, status, condition, everything by the book, but when he signed off, he turned to her one more time. You saved our lives today, Ghost Rider. Kira met his eyes. We saved our lives, Captain. But that wasn't how the story spread. Within a week, every pilot in the theater had heard some version of it. The girl who flew through a mountain, the rookie who threaded a needle, the quota hire who turned out to be the real deal. Kira heard the whispers in the chow line, saw the looks in the ready room, some respectful, some skeptical. some still convinced it was luck, not skill. She didn't care. She'd stopped caring years ago what people thought of her when the engines shut down. All that mattered was what she thought of herself when the sun came up. But then Captain Holloway did something unexpected. He put her in for a medal, a real one, the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation read like poetry, extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight under emergency conditions. It didn't mention her gender. It didn't mention quotas or checkboxes or proving anyone wrong. It just told the story of a pilot who saved 3 lives with nothing but skill, nerve, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. The ceremony was small. A dozen officers in a canvas tent at Bagram, the smell of diesel and dust thick in the air. Kira stood at attention while a colonel she'd never met pinned the medal to her flight suit, said words about courage and professionalism. She nodded, saluted, went back to work. But Holloway cornered her afterward, a cup of burned coffee in each hand. "You're not going to celebrate." "Nothing to celebrate. I did my job." "You did more than that." Kira took the coffee. "With respect, Captain, if I were a man, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd have done my job, and that would be the end of it." Holloway was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're right, but that doesn't mean what you did wasn't extraordinary." "It was necessary." "Extraordinary things usually are." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. Not the grudging kind, earned through attrition and outlasting the doubters. Real respect. The kind that saw her as a pilot first and everything else distant second. "Thank you," she said quietly. Holloway nodded. "You've got orders. HQ wants you for a special assignment. Transport Command, high-value personnel and equipment. It's a career maker." "What's the catch?" "No catch. You're good at what you do. They need people who are good at what they do." Kira sipped the coffee. It tasted like mud and burned rubber. "Perfect. I'll think about it." "Don't think too long. Slots only open for 72 hours. He walked away, and Kira stood there holding her coffee and her medal, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The same mountains she'd flown through a week ago. The same mountains that had tried to kill her. She thought about all the times she'd been told she didn't belong. The flight instructors who'd washed her out on technicalities. The commanders who'd kept her flying cargo while men with half her hours flew combat missions. The quiet certainty that no matter how good she was, it would never be good enough. And then she thought about the valley. The way the walls had closed in and the sky had opened up. The way her hands had known what to do before her mind could catch up. The way she'd flown like she was born to it. Because she was. Ghost Rider. She turned. Reyes was standing there, gear bag over his shoulder, headed out for his next rotation. "Heard you got orders." "Yeah." "You taking them?" Kira looked back at the mountains. "Yeah," she said, "I think I am." 3 months later, she was flying a C-130 Hercules on a classified run into hostile territory. The mission brief had been sparse. Extract a high-value asset from a compromised location. Wheels up in 15 minutes. Radio silence until exfil. The kind of mission that made careers or ended them. Kira sat in the left seat, running pre-flight checks with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Her co-pilot was a major named Tennyson, a quiet guy with 20 years in and a face like weathered leather. He'd nodded when she'd introduced herself, said, "Heard about you," and left it at that. Now they were 30 minutes out, flying nap of the earth through a river valley to avoid radar, and Tennyson was finally talking. "You really thread that mountain pass on one engine." "Yep." "How narrow?" "Narrow enough." He grunted. "You scared?" "Terrified." "But you did it anyway." "That's the job." Tennyson was quiet for a moment. Then, "My daughter wants to be a pilot. She's 16, smart as hell, but she keeps asking me if it's worth it. All the BS she's going to have to put up with." Kira kept her eyes on the terrain. What do you tell her? I tell her it's worth it if she makes it worth it. That the only opinion that matters is the one she has of herself when she's in the seat. Kira smiled. That's good advice. I stole it from someone. Who? You read it in an interview you did for Stars and Stripes. You said flying isn't about proving you belong. It's about knowing you already do. Kira remembered that interview. A junior correspondent who'd asked all the predictable questions about being a woman in a man's world. She'd answered honestly because that was the only way she knew how. And apparently, somewhere, a 16-year-old girl had read those words and seen a future. Tell your daughter she's got this, Kira said. Tell her the sky doesn't care who's flying. It only cares if you're good. Will do, Ghost Rider. The landing zone appeared ahead, a dirt strip carved into a hillside, barely long enough for the Hercules. Kira brought the bird down hard and fast, revering thrust the second the wheels touched, bringing them to a shuddering stop with 50 feet to spare. The back ramp dropped, and a team of operators sprinted aboard with a stretcher. On it was a man in his 50s, unconscious, pale as death. The team leader gave her a thumbs up, and Kira spooled the engines back to full power. They were wheels up in under 3 minutes. The flight back was tense. Enemy radar had painted them twice, and there were reports of anti-aircraft batteries in the region. Kira kept the Hercules low, using the terrain to mask their signature, but her heart was hammering in her chest the whole time. This was different from the mountains. This was active combat. This was people trying to kill her specifically. She'd never felt more alive. They crossed into friendly airspace at dawn, and Tennyson let out a breath he'd been holding for an hour. Nice flying, Ghost Rider. Thanks, Major. You know who that was, the guy on the stretcher. Nope. Aid worker. Got caught in a bombing. Normally we wouldn't risk a bird for one civilian, but apparently this guy's saved about 1,000 lives in the past year. Built wells, distributed medicine, negotiated ceasefires. Real hero type. Kira thought about that, about the calculus of war. How many lives was one worth? How many risks were justified? She dropped medical supplies to save her crew. Now she'd risked her crew to save one man. The math never balanced. You just did what you could and hoped it was enough. Glad we got him out, she said. Me too. They landed at Bagram as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood. Kira shut down the engines and sat in the sudden silence, watching the ground crew swarm the aircraft. Somewhere behind her, medics were loading the aid worker into an ambulance. Somewhere ahead of her, another mission was waiting. But for now she was just a pilot, sitting in a cockpit, doing her job. And that was enough. The reputation grew, not through self-promotion or calculated PR, but through the quiet accumulation of missions flown, lives saved, impossible situations navigated. Kira became the pilot people requested by name, the one commanders wanted for the hard jobs, the one who'd get you there and back, no matter what. She flew supply runs to isolated outposts, medevac missions under fire, VIP transports through contested airspace. Each mission added another story to the legend. Ghost Rider who flew through a sandstorm when every other bird was grounded. Ghost Rider who landed on a damaged runway with one landing gear collapsed. Ghost Rider who talked a rookie pilot through an engine failure over the radio while simultaneously flying her own aircraft through the same storm. The call sign became more than a name. It became a standard, a promise. When Ghost Rider was on the schedule, people breathed easier, because they knew whatever happened, she'd find a way. But Kira never forgot where she'd come from, the skepticism, the doubt, the weight of being the first, the only, the exception. She remembered every instructor who'd told her she wasn't strong enough, every commander who'd questioned her judgment, every co-pilot who'd checked her work twice because he didn't trust her calculations. She remembered because forgetting would be a betrayal, not of herself, but of every woman who'd come before and every girl who'd come after. The ones who'd washed out not because they couldn't fly, but because the system was designed to make them fail. The ones who'd been good enough but never given the chance to prove it. So when she was offered a position as an instructor at the Air Force Weapons School, she said yes. Not because it was prestigious, though it was. Not because it was career advancement, though it was that too. But because it was a chance to change the system from the inside. To be the instructor she'd needed and never had. To tell the next generation, male and female both, that excellence was the only currency that mattered in the cockpit. Her first class had 3 women out of 20 students. They watched her with a mixture of hope and fear, like she was either their salvation or their cautionary tale. Kira looked at them and saw herself a decade ago. Hungry, determined, scared of failing not just for themselves but for everyone who looked like them. "Listen up," she said on the first day, standing in front of a classroom full of some of the best pilots in the Air Force. "I don't care if you're male, female, or a sentient cloud of gas. In my classroom, the only thing that matters is whether you can fly, whether you can think under pressure, whether you can make the hard calls when the stakes are life and death. You're here because you're good. My job is to make you great. Your job is to not waste my time or yours by worrying about anything except becoming the best pilot you can be. Clear?" "Yes, ma'am," they chorused. "Good, let's get to work." The first few weeks were brutal. Kira didn't coddle, didn't make excuses, didn't lower standards. She pushed them all equally hard, gave no quarter based on gender or rank or reputation. When someone made a mistake, she corrected it. When someone showed brilliance, she acknowledged it. When someone quit, she let them go without judgment. By the end of the first month, 2 students had washed out. Neither was one of the women. By the end of the course, all 3 women had graduated in the top 10 of their class. One of them, a captain named Rivera, scored the highest marks in aerial combat maneuvering the school had seen in 5 years. Kira watched her accept her certificate, saw the pride in her eyes, and felt something she hadn't expected. Legacy. Not the medal and monument kind. The quieter, deeper kind. The knowledge that she'd changed a life. That somewhere, years from now, Rivera would be sitting in a cockpit making an impossible decision, and she'd hear Kira's voice in her head saying, "You're good enough. Now prove it to yourself." That was the legacy that mattered. Years passed. Kira flew less, taught more, rose through the ranks not through politics but through undeniable competence, made colonel at 42, was offered a star at 45, turned it down because she didn't want a desk job. She wanted to fly, to teach, to be in the place where the work actually happened. The stories about Ghost Rider became legend. Not tall tales, but the kind of stories pilots told in ready rooms and bars, voices hushed with respect. The time she'd landed a C-130 on a highway during a natural disaster to evacuate civilians. The time she'd talked a cargo pilot through a hydraulic failure over the Pacific, staying on the radio for 4 hours until he was safely on the ground. The time she'd flown into a wildfire to extract firefighters, the heat so intense it melted paint off the fuselage. But the story that mattered most, the one that was told again and again, was the first one. The mountain pass, the single engine, the impossible choice and the perfect execution. Because that was the story that proved everything that came after wasn't luck. It was skill. It was preparation. It was the quiet accumulation of 1,000 hours of practice and discipline and refusal to accept anything less than excellence. It was Kira Vance being exactly who she'd always been, a pilot who came back. On her 50th birthday, the Air Force threw her a party, small, intimate. Just the people who'd flown with her, fought with her, learned from her. There were speeches, toasts, laughter and tears, and at the end of the night, Captain Marcus Holloway, now a full colonel himself, stood up. "I want to tell you all about the day I met Ghost Rider," he said. His hair was gray now, his face lined, but his eyes were the same. "I thought she was a quota higher, a checkbox, someone I'd have to carry. And then we lost an engine over the Hindu Kush, and she saved my life. Our lives. She flew that bird through a mountain pass I wouldn't have attempted in a fighter jet, and she did it like it was just another Tuesday. And afterward, when I asked her where she learned to fly like that, she said, everywhere. Because that's who she is. She learns everywhere from everything. She takes every lesson, every failure, every moment of doubt, and she turns it into fuel, into lift, into the kind of excellence that doesn't just save lives, it inspires them. He raised his glass. To Ghost Rider, the best pilot I've ever flown with, and the best instructor the Air Force has ever had. May we all be lucky enough to fly as high. To Ghost Rider. Kira stood there surrounded by people who'd become family and felt the weight of it. The years, the missions, the lives touched and changed. She thought about the girl she'd been, flying her uncle's Cessna over Kansas fields, dreaming of clouds. She thought about the officer she'd become, fighting for every inch of respect in a world that didn't want to give it. And she thought about the legacy she'd built, not through force or anger, but through quiet, relentless competence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Later, after the party wound down and the crowd dispersed, Kira walked out onto the tarmac. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. She looked up, and for a moment she was 15 again. Infinite possibility stretched out above her. Infinite sky. She'd flown through storms and mountains and fire. She'd faced down doubt and prejudice and her own fear. She'd saved lives, changed lives, built a legacy that would outlive her. But standing there under the stars, she realized the most important thing she'd done. The thing that mattered more than medals or promotions or stories told in ready rooms. She'd proven, beyond any doubt, that the sky belonged to anyone brave enough to reach for it. And she'd shown an entire generation of women that they could reach too. Ghost Rider closed her eyes, breathed in the night air, and smiled. She'd come back, she always did, and she always would.